All righty. About that time. Went a little bit over during the service a little bit, but Lord watching over us, and praise be to the Lord. Now throughout this last week we've been going through Luke 12, and that's what we got this morning. Luke 12, 1 through 34. So this is kind of the most of this chapter as we gather together. So first, any kind of thoughts from last week that kind of percolated? Hard to remember yesterday, much less last week. And so Luke 12, again, we're getting into the, going to the end of his second year of the ministry, which is the year of popularity, and getting more into his third year of ministry, which would be more the year of opposition. And we can kind of see where that all takes place, and a bit of the why as Jesus teaches here. So remember, he was talking to the Pharisees, he was talking to the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, and saying things that, they didn't exactly want to hear. Things they did not think that this would be things to bring forward to them. And now we go to the next chapter. In the meantime, as I said, this is the transition from popularity to opposition. There were still lots that came even during the opposition, but a lot of the focus tends to be more on those that were opposed to Jesus when they get towards that third year of the ministry. In the meantime, when so many thousands of people had gathered together that they were trampling one another. So that just gives you an idea of how many there were that were gathered together. First, you get to the many thousands of people. That's a lot of people. That's a lot that are gathering together just to hear Jesus. They could have used a little bit of Walt Disney World's way of using ropes in order to keep people from trampling onto each other. Anybody ever been to Walt Disney World or something? And then they kind of have that where you kind of wait for a little bit, and then you think you're almost at the end, and all of a sudden, oh, and then there's this group next. Oh, and now there's another group that you have to. But here, and it happened so much that they were actually trampling one another. Which just gives an idea of how many we're talking about that were gathered together just to hear Jesus. And so he began to say to his disciples first. Now you get on, don't throw away stuff as you go throughout Scripture. So now this has all happened. They had heard what he said to the Pharisee. They had heard what he had said to the lawyer. Remember the lawyer being the legal, the law of the Mosaic law. That law is what we're looking at. So he said to his disciples. And then, so there's a differentiation. Disciples here would have included the 12, but would have been more than the 12. I'll probably grab one afterwards. So you're probably talking to definitely the 12 apostles would be a part of this. There would be more than those as well. But this would be kind of the next group out from the 12. So you've got the 12, and then you've got the next layer. And then you go to the big group. That's where you've got people from everywhere that just come to hear Jesus. Disciples are ones that are following and going to try to listen very intently and to make what Jesus was saying part of their life. So this would have included the 12. This would have included the 72 that Jesus sent out. It would have included others as well that were of his disciples. Mary Magdalene, Lazarus, among others. Nicodemus would have considered himself to be a disciple. Not a public disciple, but a disciple of Jesus. So now he's talking to us. So there were different times when he was doing it. And you notice that he is at one point, where he would be preaching to the entire huge group that's over here. Then at other times, like here, to the disciples. So this would have been a smaller, more intimate group. You know, intimate, maybe a couple hundred people. Depends what you mean by intimate. But as opposed to thousands trampling upon one another. He would then have a smaller group that he would be teaching as well. And then he would have times where he would be just with the 12 as well. Or at times where he might take the 3 along with him. So that when Jesus goes up to the Mount of Transfiguration, and he takes 3 with him, that's not viewed as weird or different. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he takes the disciples to the garden, and then he takes the 3 a little bit further along with him, that was a normal way that he operated. And so you kind of had different groups that Jesus would talk to. And probably different ways and mannerisms of teaching too. If you're teaching 6,000 people, you can't exactly be teaching and then say, okay, now let's have, did you get what I was saying? Oh wait, did you? Or it doesn't exactly work if you say, okay, now let's all get into small groups, and if those are good ways to teach, but you just can't quite do that if you got 6,000 people. Yep.
You know, because he didn't have a microphone, how could that many people hear? I mean, wouldn't you almost have to be yelling?
Well, probably one passage, Jesus was along the Sea of Galilee, and a large group was gathered right there in order to hear him. And so people, exactly what you're saying, couldn't hear him. So what did Jesus do? He calls on the disciples, and he takes the boat out a little ways so that he could preach out and they could hear. And so that's just one example. And so why was this the case? Well, in that case, he went out onto the water so that the projection could happen and they could hear.
Kind of like an echo?
Let's see here. Who here fishes? Okay, got a couple of fish. If you're out there on the water, and you're out there in the middle of the water, you can hear other fishermen sneeze, can't you? You can hear anybody not too far away. It just kind of goes along. Another example, we get to the one of Jesus' famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount. That's where you would have Jesus kind of sitting up here and then preaching, and then because he'd be higher and they'd be lower, you would have the projection naturally taking place.
Kind of like an amphitheater.
Exactly. Yep. And so you would have, when the crowds came, he picked the places where he would be. And most common seems to be on hills or mountains where he would have them at, so that he could be up and speaking down. That's why in many of our sanctuaries, you got the pulpit, and the pulpit is way up, right? When Maria built our sanctuary up there, we were not thinking how to get Bluetooth to work. What year was the sanctuary built? 50s? Is that right?
Somewhere in there, I think.
Can't remember the cornerstone out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
A while back. But, and you know very well, Kevin, how much work has had to be put in to get this other stuff to fit with the infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. And so the sanctuary itself was built to have people hear the voice of the pastor. And there is such a thing as a pastor voice too. Pastors are able to project a little bit more as well. When I did my first sermons, I was with the Christian Ministry of National Parks, and this was out, and what we did is we did the services in a outside amphitheater, and it was right along Lake Yellowstone. But sometimes you would get the wind and things of that nature. But if you are able to project, you can speak over the wind. You can speak, and so while Jesus may not have been a model or something, I would say he had a very clear voice. and a very loud voice. And if anybody's heard me speak outside, I can project my voice quite well. Even inside, at the first congregation I was at, they had the microphones and all of that. I never used it. Because everybody could just hear me. But we also have the pulpit as kind of the up, so that it also goes out to everybody else. And so if you're a little bit higher, the voice goes out even further. And some, like a church when I was down in St. Louis, not one this one I visited a couple times, literally the pulpit was, let me see here, well, we'll just say the head of the pastor. So where the actual voice would be coming out was about, let's see here, you have to start at the beginning and then you had the steps, so you had about 3 feet of steps to get to the base of the altar. And from there you had another, I think it was about, so you had about 22, 23 feet up of where the pastor was, as opposed to everybody being down here. And so it would have been out there. And so it was, if you're getting that high up, you better not have a fear of heights. But boy, does that voice boom over everybody when you're that high up. Yep.
You know, in seminary, do they talk about the importance of clergy speaking up so people can hear?
Yeah. Speak up, but they say speak up. The thing that they work more intently on is articulation. And so, because we got microphones and all of that nowadays, things can be adjusted. But at the seminary, what they work the most at is speaking so that you are articulating what you are actually saying. Which, to a certain degree, also means slowing down. Anybody that's spoken in public knows the natural human reaction when you are speaking is to start getting a little bit faster, and I'm going a little bit, and you start just going, speeding up like nothing else. And so, a big part of, in that regard, not so much the speaking out, which is very helpful, but slowing down and articulating, kind of like in choir. One of the main reasons I was in choir throughout seminary is it helped me to learn articulation, that you don't really, because in order for people to hear, when you're singing in a choir, you want people to understand what you're saying. And it's easy for a choir to start sounding the notes and not actually hearing the words. And it takes work in order to sing so that it can be understood what you're saying. Carol?
Well, many times speakers, when they talk, they let their voices go down at the end of a sentence. You can't hear what they say
Yep.
at the end of a sentence. They drop their voice a couple octaves down. You can't hear what they say.
Yep.
I had a tough time in Louisiana at the Army,
Oh.
talking down there. After a while, they go, Minnesota, slow down.
Yep.
We're just too fast.
Well, and for anywhere, especially public speaking, you need to slow down. Because even if you're of that culture, you still miss so much. The ear can only hit so much going forward to hear what's being said. And same thing also with sermons. And I did this for a while, haven't done it in a long time. But I would take my sermons, and WordPerfect used to have a thing where you go through the sermon and see what level of writing that you have. Because for some, in order to preach, you don't want to speak higher than about a 5th grade level. Not because people can't understand words that you're saying, but because when you get beyond that, you start getting these complex sentence structures that happen. And it's very hard for people to follow along when you're a sentence, and then you have a sentence that's like a 4-part sentence in it. You're not reading the sermon, you're hearing the sermon.
But you know, the reason why talking slowly is important is in the liturgy too, isn't just so you can articulate and hear individual syllables and words, but also in the nature of preaching, you need some time to absorb.
Yeah.
So if the pastor is just galloping along, you're kinda, you see what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
That could easily happen, yes. And especially because part of the problem that sometimes happens too in that same regards, and every preacher, every pastor runs into it, is you know where you're going. And so I know what I'm saying. I know where the steps are. I know what's going on. That does not mean everybody hearing does. And so part of slowing down too, and part of then going on to the next piece, whatever that might be, you need something to kind of bring them forward to the next thought, which I found the screen helps immensely. That this is now getting onto a new piece as we go forward. Or sometimes I'll say it and it's a continuation as well. So getting to, and it helps to, part of what I like about the pictures is that it helps to support what's going on in the sermon. I find it's very easy, and I just, there's all sorts of pitfalls, to let the pictures lead then the sermon. But then it's like but then you end up, how can I find all of these pictures? Okay, now I've got these pictures, now I'm gonna wrap the sermon around them. When the other area is where you should go with the sermon. Here is the sermon. Now, what can I have to help to emphasize what I'm already sharing and bringing forward?